Hello and welcome back to my RC channel. I'm AndyRC and today I'm checking out the HGLRC Parrot120 Pro. They do a non-pro version of this model, but the only difference between the two are the motors, making the non-pro version a 2S model and the pro version a 3S model. They have decided to add the word toothpick to the end of it, but for me this is a 2.5 inch 3S brushless micro. It's a stretched X with a 2.5mm carbon fiber unibody frame and everything is really good quality. I also think it's an aesthetically pleasing looking model with blue, turquoise and teal being my favourite colours. I have to say though, I'm still not a fan of these arms, which are more like struts. I understand why they do it to get the weight down, but I'm yet to fly a model with this type of frame that doesn't suffer from some kind of prop wash. And I think it's the gaps in the frame causing turbulent air to feed back through the props. There is a little bit of flex in the arms as well, and while this model is light for a 2.5 inch model, its dry weight is 75 grams, which is around about the weight of 2-inch models from about a year ago, making it almost twice as heavy as what people usually call a toothpick. They are ticking the right boxes underneath though, with a silicone mat to stop your battery from slipping in a crash and potentially throwing it, and you also get a decent battery strap. The motors are HGLRC's Flame brand with an 1106 6000 kV naked bottom motor, and this is why I say it's a 2.5 inch brushless micro, because the motors are the same spec as the Emax Babyhawk R Pro, which has a dry weight of 88 grams, so it's not that much lighter than the Emax model. The props are the Gemfan 20-50-40 tri-blades, and you are given 2 spares of those in the box. They have used magic tape to tidy up the silicone motor wires, making it a really neat build. The stack is HGLRC's own FD413, which consists of a 16x16 4-in-1 BL Heli S ESC board rated to 13 amps with a 15 amp burst. They actually came flash with BL Heli S version 16.6, so I upgraded them to 16.7 because this model doesn't have a physical beeper and D-Shock commands don't work on 16.6. So with these motors being slightly bigger, the beacon is actually quite loud, so I'd say that that's a mandatory update that you need to do to this model given the size of it. The entire stack is soft mounted, so there shouldn't be any vibration issues. Attached to the battery terminals is a 25 volt 470 microfarad low ESR capacitor. It's not a brand I've heard of before, however HGLRC are masters at getting rid of noise, so I have no doubt that it's going to work just fine. However, they don't tell you what battery to use other than it accepts a 2 to 3S LiPo. With 6000 kV, it's going to be pretty gutless on 2S, and from my past experience, coupled with the length of the battery strap, the best LiPo is going to be a 3S GMB 550mA, giving an all-up weight of 139 grams. The flight controller is an F4 with Betaflight on-screen display and needs a complete setup. There are settings in there, however they are just the stock settings if you were to buy the stack on its own. So the PIDs are stock Betaflight PIDs, and if you use them the model will fly to the moon. So seeing as I've had to tune and set up the model, I'll put the CLI dump that I came up with in the description of this video for you to download. But bear in mind, you can build 2 identical quads and the PIDs still need to be different. I haven't touched the filters because messing around with filters could be fine for my model but fry the motors on yours. So I don't tend to touch filters in tunes that I provide to the public. The model was also tuned with Betaflight version 4.04 and, as I mentioned, using a GMB 550mA 3S LiPo, so it's just a baseline to get you flying. Don't put the CLI dump into a different version of Betaflight because Betaflight often change the syntax of the code quite often. And while it sounds like a downside, HGLRC provide a single sheet of paper rather than a manual, which tells you that you need to set up the model yourself. Which brings me back to what I say in all of my bind and fly reviews. These models are for people who know how to build but don't have the time to do so, and not the other way around. Otherwise, when something breaks, you won't know how to fix it. Tuning, on the other hand, especially with micros and Betaflight 4, can be tricky, but I'd still recommend not fully relying on someone else's tune and having a go yourself. The VTX uses the tramp protocol and has pit mode. It switches from 25mW up to 400mW and has 48 channels. It's using a micro UFL connector, which you can forgive at this size, and its antenna is a linear sleeve dipole, which is housed nicely in the canopy. This is the FrSky XM Plus version, which has come flashed with the FCC D16 non-RSSI firmware, which is a shame because with this VTX and receiver setup, you will get a really good range from it, so an RSSI readout would have been nice. You can flash it yourself, of course, it's just a pain to do so. You can also get it with a FlySky receiver or as a plug and fly. There are only 2 UARTs in total. One is taken up by the tramp protocol and the other for the S-Bus receiver. However, there is a separate uninverted TX and RX pad if you want to do crossfire, and there's also a 3.3 volt pad if you want to do spectrum. The antennas for the XM Plus are also nicely mounted using straws and some red rubber tips. They have been heat shrunk onto the straws so they won't fall off, which is refreshing because they usually do, but they do still give you a spare in the package just in case. However, housing the antennas and looking really cool is all the 3D printed mount is good for, and perhaps my voice isn't big enough to get this across to these companies, so I'm going to try again. The camera is the Cadex Turbo EOS 2, and while it's not the best camera, it's cheap, and when it's mounted correctly, its image is acceptable. But it's a CMOS camera, and again I'll put a card up in the top corner on why CMOS cameras produce giallo. So whether it's a budget nano CMOS camera or one of the higher end nano CMOS cameras, you can't get away with mounting them in a flexible 3D printed material, or you will get giallo at high RPM. This is why I think people are using dual blades with these models, because you get less thrust, and you will see later when the model is cruising there won't be any giallo in the picture, but on full throttle with tri-blades and some sunlight, the image will get very distorted. So if you want a lot of power and use these nano cameras, they need to be mounted in something solid, which is why the GEP-RC Phantom or the Asteroid 3 doesn't get any giallo because they have mounted them properly. The EOS 2 is the 4x3 version and NTSC. Betaflight is set to PAL, so if you don't change it to NTSC, the on-screen display will be missing if you plug your battery in and look through your goggles out of the box. There's also not a lot of room to change the camera angle, but this amount of angle suits me, however it might not suit you. Left in the box is a quality control certificate, some stickers, a manual for the XM Plus, and a load of spare screws. Okay, let's go for a line of sight with this guy. Well, that's so far so good because it hasn't flown to the moon, which is what it does on stock Betaflight PIDs, but stock Betaflight PIDs are designed for a much bigger quadcopter, like a 5-inch, so this thing just oscillates itself to the sky. So let's give it a punch out and see how much power it's got, bearing in mind that technically it's got the same spec motors as the Emax Babyhawk Pro, so they are 6000 kV 1106, but it's 17 grams lighter than that model. So let's go for a punch out. Yeah, that just disappears. You could lose orientation very quickly with that. But I'm not hearing any oscillations. Maybe I've finally cracked Betaflight 4 and micros. Yeah, the PIDs are really low compared to stock values, which is not surprising. They are so low that the D-term min isn't even worth using, because that'd be just too low otherwise. The sun's out as well, so hopefully gonna get an FPV flight in to see if I get any jello through that camera, but I'm pretty sure that it's gonna get that mounted in TPU. It's really only HGLRC with their Phantom that realised that you can't mount these CMOS FPV cameras in TPU just because of the way they work. But seems to be flying nice line of sight at least. And it's got bags of power, and I really like that these things are able to get lighter. I sort of gave up on 2-inch really and went to 3-inch, but I can see the appeal now. I mean, you know, we're on 2.5-inch here, and it's lighter than the 2 inches were from maybe a year ago. It's all thanks down to these all-in-one boards and their 16x16 stacks. I'm having too much fun flying this thing, line of sight. They have give out torrential rain for about the rest of the day in about 2 hours. You wouldn't believe it, but that is the country that I live in, so I want to get an FPV flight in before it does that. Well, Google Weather was not wrong. As I'm doing this voiceover, it is absolutely chucking it down, but luckily I got a flight in early on in the morning, and you'll see as I face the sun, just look how much the image gets distorted. Now, you can fly through it, but it just bothers me, you know. Feel like no one's listening, and I don't think you would save much weight by just putting a carbon plate over the top of this thing and having the camera mounted properly. So it's either that or stick a CCD camera in there, because CCD cameras use something called a global shutter. So a CMOS camera uses a rolling shutter, which means that it scans down the picture as you're looking at it. So when you go up on the throttle and the camera starts to shake, the image distorts, because as it's scanning down the picture, it's not capturing the image all in one go, whereas a global shutter captures the image in one go. Therefore, you don't get this jello that we are seeing. But as you can see, like I said, when you're on low throttle, you don't get it. And that's because when we go up on the throttle, we've got more vibrations coming from those tri-blades, and it causes that mount to shake, and that's where we get the jello from. So yeah, they need to sort that out, you know. When Full Speed came out with their toothpick and also their Cinecopters as well, they were having the same problems. Of course, you can add ND filters, so I have picked this particular sunny day because the more light that enters the camera, the worse that it is. That's how it works. So if you have less light entering the camera, then the shutter of the camera slows down, and therefore it doesn't distort the image as much. But you know, even though for where I live most of the year is going to be overcast, so it's not specific to me as much, I know there are a lot of people out there who are lucky enough to have sun throughout all of the year, and if you go up on full throttle and use full throttle a lot, then you're gonna get distortions in the picture. But anyways, some positives to take away for sure. It's flying great. As I suspected, there is the odd bit of prop wash, but I would say it's not bad. When I compare it to the HGLRC Phantom, which has 0 prop wash, then this does have a little, but it's not as bad as the Lava. And as I say, I felt like I got a pretty good tune out of it. There's a couple of wobbles here and there, and it was in the morning and flat calm, so there's no excuse. There's also no video breakup either, so that's good. No interference from the electrical system, and I'm using the rapid fire module with a Bandicoot patch antenna and also a periscope invader antenna, and it's working great. So yeah, the voltage sag wasn't too bad either, and a great flight time. Look at this, 4 minutes and we're at the end of the flight. So I'll put a link in the description if you wish to get one, and as always, thanks so much for watching. Please continue to subscribe. Cheers.